So as the year 2020 comes to a close and we start to look to 2021, it of course raises the question, how should we be investing right now? Based on how markets, economies, and technologies are evolving. And so to that end, we'll ask the question, is Bitcoin the best alternative asset for investment in 2021? Welcome to ReadySetCrypto. This is your brain on blockchain. So Bitcoin is many things to many people. Why they choose to hold Bitcoin depends on their circumstances and views of what Bitcoin is today and what it could become in the future. So to begin exploring the validity of Bitcoin as an investment in 2021, let's start talking about the difference between return and risk. A Yale study conducted by economists examined whether the returns of digital assets, specifically Bitcoin, Ether, and Ripple, behave like the returns of other asset classes, stocks, traditional currencies, and precious metal commodities. And based on their analysis, the return behavior of all digital assets, including Bitcoin, could not be explained by the risk factors that account for the returns in stocks, currencies, or precious metal commodities, or by macroeconomic factors. Rather, economists found that Bitcoin's performance is driven by cryptocurrency-specific factors, such as the momentum effect and proxies for average and negative investor attention. What the momentum effect means is that an asset is likely to continue increasing in value if it's already just increased in value. And what that means is that Bitcoin's price and the sentiment surrounding Bitcoin experience a self-reinforcing effect. We could measure the Twitter posts or the Google searches about Bitcoin and correlate that pretty strongly against Bitcoin's price. So something to really consider about Bitcoin and digital assets as a whole is that what drives their price, their narrative, changes and potentially matures over time. And for example, performance has not been historically connected to the change in Bitcoin's fundamental metrics. And if you followed cryptocurrency for any length of time, you know that the performance of crypto assets, digital assets, hasn't always been driven by fundamentals, instead being driven by speculative trading activity. However, over time, as the investors and market participants analyzing and participating in Bitcoin markets evolve, its performance may be tied to a greater extent to fundamental adoption variables and to a lesser extent, reflexivity and sentiment. I think in 2021, that is definitely something to pay attention to because global investor sentiment, it does have an impact on Bitcoin's price, but Bitcoin has distinct underlying fundamentals that are not affected by the health and economic situation created by the pandemic. Compare that to traditional economies and economics, where we have demand shocks or the decline in consumer demand for goods and services due to lockdowns and unemployment. We have supply shocks or production limitations and supply chain shutdowns, and the ensuing policy response by governments and central banks, be that quantitative easing or record low interest rates. And on the other hand, Bitcoin's fundamentals and utility are not directly affected by a decline in profitability or production or an increase in the money supply. And instead, these headwinds may increase the attractiveness of an investment in Bitcoin. And I think investors are taking note. So this is where it gets really interesting. This is where we have to study Bitcoin's evolving narratives. You see, another angle on Bitcoin's lack of movement with traditional assets is the absence of an agreed upon narrative. At any given time, the narratives have ranged from Bitcoin as a means of payment, a reserve currency for digital assets, a store of value asset, safe haven, the list goes on. But this lack of consensus could be an important reason why Bitcoin has not traded in line with other assets to date. Something that we have seen this year and is a salient narrative is that Bitcoin is an emerging store of value asset. But most recently, Bitcoin's behavior has been inconsistent with prices moving in step with different asset classes week to week. And I think this is a very important evolution for Bitcoin because even though the media seems to detract from Bitcoin if it's not maintaining this consistent narrative, if one week it looks like a store of value asset and the next week it doesn't, I don't think that detracts from its value, especially as its narrative is still emerging. You see, in the early days of Bitcoin's existence, events and sentiment affecting traditional markets had little to no impact on Bitcoin's markets. Bitcoin's trading infrastructure was completely independent of traditional market infrastructure, and Bitcoin's ability to react to current events affecting traditional markets in real time, it was limited because Bitcoin's trading was not integrated into traditional markets. But as the infrastructure has matured, participants in Bitcoin markets and traditional markets have started to overlap. This is why we've seen so much noise about institutional investors now being able to trade Bitcoin futures and options on the same platform they use to trade derivatives of other assets. At the same time, retail investors can now buy and sell Bitcoin on certain platforms that allow them to trade stocks. And I think this is one of the most important things to note, because as Bitcoin matures and the profile of market participants in Bitcoin expands to include more participants from traditional markets, well, Bitcoin could become more correlated with other assets, increasing its overall value. As Kathy Wood from ARK Invest said, most people have an overallocation of bonds relative to where they should be. It can't all go into equities, and people are thinking about inflation to begin with. So it'll be very natural for Bitcoin to absorb some of the money flowing out of bonds. And I think this is something very important to consider, because as Bitcoin's narrative becomes more consistent, as it proves to stand alone from the fiat money system, well, that's where I think Bitcoin really shines as an investment. And I think a quote from Chamath really highlights this. Bitcoin to me is the only thing that I've seen so far that is really fundamentally uncorrelated to that decision-making process and to that decision-making body, because at the end of the day, any other asset class, equities, debt, real estate, commodities, well, they're all tightly coupled to a legislative framework and an interconnectedness in the financial markets. So you see, Bitcoin is unique in that it continues to be influenced by retail investor sentiment and can capitalize on the shift in the way that retail investors interact with traditional markets and consume financial information. And so I think this is one of the best reasons why Bitcoin could continue to serve as a portfolio diversifier, if not being the best investment in 2021, because Bitcoin's fundamentals are relatively shielded from economic impact of the pandemic, as its functionality is not predicated on profitability or production, and Bitcoin is natively digital. But I really think the simple explanation as to why Bitcoin is the best investment in 2021 is that it simply does not fit into any defined asset categories, making it the ultimate alternative asset. As Bitcoin grows and matures, and as investors study its characteristics, as institutional investors and retail investors really start to get on board, well, I think that opens the door for helping Bitcoin mature into an independent asset class. That, I think, is the most important narrative surrounding Bitcoin in 2021. Bitcoin is not just an alternative asset or investment anymore. It is an alternative asset class that stands alone and above many others. Bitcoin is a unique investable asset with compelling differences relative to traditional asset classes. And I think in 2021, with the way economics are developing, there is nothing better you could ask for. So what do you think? Do you think Bitcoin is the best investment in 2021? Do you think Bitcoin is maturing? What do you think is going to happen next year? And how are you planning for it? Let's discuss in the comments below. And if you haven't done so already, be sure to join the 10x tribe for free by following the link in the bio below to get access to our exclusive trader community, where we share trading tips, education, opportunities, and really help you get your trading on track to go to 10x and beyond. And if that sounds at all interesting, again, the link is in the bio below, and I can't wait to see you there. But as always, thank you so much for watching the video. I'll see you in the next one. Take care out there. Cheers.